Welcome, Senator English.
Thank you.
So last year, you created the Climate Change Adaptation Commission. I think I got that name right.
It's a long name, Climate Change and Adaptation Commission.
Well, I'm glad you stumbled over it too, so we're even on that. Talk a little bit about what that is, why you created it, and what's the significance?
Well, in the creation of that particular commission, the bill that created that, we answered the question definitively for Hawaii, is climate change real? Well, we said, yes, it is, and we're no longer debating that question. So now we're looking at the science, and we're asking the academics and others to come up with plans for Hawaii and how do we deal with this. So I think the transformational thing of creating that particular commission, which the legislature, both houses agreed to, and we worked very hard to create, was simply that we're no longer debating the question. We're now trying to find how do we deal with it. So that's the defining difference with that commission.
So what does it do?
Well, exactly that. It looks at what climate change is. It looks at, it's creating models and projections of how sea level rise will look like for us in Hawaii. One of the things that they did that's been very, very useful is they created a model of the coastal areas down to the TMK, so down to the parcels of land. And they did projections using imperial measurements, so 1 foot, 1.5 feet, 2 feet, 3 feet, approximately 1 meter of sea level rise, and then gave a projection of time. So now landowners and property owners and planners and places like Waikiki can start looking at the projections of what would happen if 1 foot of sea level rise and approximately when it would happen.
Well, let's do the picture 1,000 words thing. Danny, can you bring up that slide, first slide? So this is a picture, and you see the black star, I think it is, right there. That's where we're sitting right now. And so this is under just 1 foot, I believe, or 1 meter of sea level rise. And then Danny, next one. That's, I believe, 3 meters.
No, that would be 1 meter, right?
So what was the first one?
The first one was a foot.
First one was a
Yeah.
foot. I'm sorry. So go back, Danny, to the 1 foot. That's 1 foot, and then go forward to 1 meter.
And that black star is where we're at.
Yeah, that black star is right. It's the Hilton Hawaiian Village, and so you can see that's pretty widespread. Now, that's suffice to say, not just a lot of real estate, but I'm guessing a lot of critical infrastructure.
Yeah, so that's one of the big things that we're looking for from government standpoint. What we're looking at is the critical infrastructure and the concept, the idea of planned retreat. In other words, we know this is happening, we know this is coming. First, we should, for the city and county of Honolulu and for the counties of Maui, Kauai, and Hawaii, the planners and the people there should really look at these maps and start considering where they're putting infrastructure. For example, the city and county of Honolulu is wanting to purchase a piece of property from the Office of Hawaiian Affairs in Kaka'ako down here for about $30 million to put in a sewage treatment pump. That's fine, but that area will be inundated probably as they finish building that structure. So, we have to look at these maps, look at the projections, and then start making some very hard decisions about how we do this. That's one. The second thing is, what we're calling planned retreat. How do we get our hands around this? The sewage treatment plants that are along the coast, the electricity production facilities along the coast, the highways and the airports, schools, all of this have to move inland, and the question becomes, we're in our current zoning structure that are controlled by the counties. How do we do it? How do we deal with this? I'll give you an example.
Actually, the question occurs to me is, now that you know this, how can you not do it? And exactly. I mean that from a perspective of liability. I mean, whether it's economic liability that the state or some, city or county gets sued, but also political liability, obviously, if we knew this and we did not act.
That's what I'm saying. We're trying to get our heads around just how big this is, and just what this means. I think this is the first governmental body to come up with projections like this. I can tell you that realtors really didn't like this in the beginning. The realtor friends that I have were very concerned. They said, well, how can we sell that piece of property, that oceanfront property, for millions of dollars when your projection is showing it's going to be underwater in 10 years or 20 years? But when you put it another way to the realtor, it's saying, you have to disclose all of these things now. Wouldn't you like to point to a government body that said this is going to happen here as opposed to make a guess at it? And that way you're not responsible. You're telling your client, this is what's going to happen more than likely in this area in this amount of time. So, it's a matter of how we approach it. I want to give you the example of, the power plant in Ma'alaia in Maui, where I'm from. It's along the ocean. It's built in basically marshlands, right? And the utility there is really trying to figure out what to do. I mean, I know at one point they're looking to put a seawall around it and other things, but really it needs to move. And then the question becomes, all right, if we say you need to move, it's planned retreat. First, it's where? And then secondly, the regulatory framework that we exist in, we would take them literally 40 years to get all the permits from the county, from the federal government, all of the permits, all of the plans, everything needs to go. It's a long process.
40 years.
I would guess, because I've way back when I was on the Maui County Council in the 1990s, late 90s, they were coming in for permits, and they still haven't built the new plant. So this is the issue. How do we do planned retreat? And if we do it, then we say, for example, for the Ma'alaia power plant, if you move here, government now has to say, we will help you create a pathway that'll get you there very quickly, because the public benefit is much greater to make sure you don't go underwater and stop producing power than a lot of the regulatory framework. So we have to now help the utilities. We have to help all of the infrastructure consider it and look at a different framework so that they can move out of the inundation zones.
Is that controversial at all? Because fast-track permitting obviously may be seen as short-circuiting some environmental impact statements or social impacts or other things.
Yeah, but you see, that's the thing, right? We have to think differently. It's no longer, I wouldn't call it fast-tracking. We would call it inundation, I would say like inundation relocation. I would call it something else that says, we need to have a plan to do this, because if we don't, it's a disruption to the basic functions of society.
Okay, but that's a semantic branding kind of thing, and it's all good. But
that's what we do.
But well, politicians, maybe you can say that, I guess. Turning this from framework and theory into action is got to be tough at both the government, public sector, and private sector. What do you see the role of the Senate or the legislature in general in helping ease some NIMBY kinds of things and
explain
NIMBY and just creating the space for not in my backyard for those who don't want power plants or wastewater treatment plants or any number of things?
Yeah, I can only speak from my experience out of Maui. When I was on the council, with Mayor Awakawa, who was a council member at the time, and other progressive council members at that time, we had a lot of people saying, we need windmills, we want windmills, put in windmills. And then the windmills went in, and those same people started fighting it, saying, look, it's blocking our view, it's so that's what I mean. Some very tough decisions have to be made. And it's going to be a very, very hard discussion for us in Hawaii, because all of our most of our infrastructure is along the coast. Most of our economic engines are along the coast. Waikiki. Look at this place from, before in the 20s and into the early 30s, when they built a canal to drain the swamp in this area so that we could have dry land, right? So, it sort of goes back to what it was. But it's a very tough political question. It's a tough economic question. And it's one and that's why it was so important for us to put into place a number of pieces of legislation. One, creating the Climate Change Commission. Others, last year we also acceded to the Paris Accords, which basically says that Hawaii will follow the international standards.
So what have you learned about, I want to get to audience questions in a minute, what have you learned about the role and responsibility of government in creating a path for the kind of the scale, scope, and speed of change that's needed that might be useful to politicians, government officials outside of Hawaii?
So for many of the Pacific Island nations around us, they do follow Hawaii's lead. And in fact, for example, this year we tried to put into statute the 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals. The Senate adopted it as our guiding framework. We passed the bill. It went to the House, and
probably the first state and only state to do that in the U.S.
Yeah. The House wouldn't agree to it, so it didn't pass. But it served its purpose because I want to just acknowledge Mayor Alan Arakawa from Maui, because he immediately did an executive order adopting the Paris Accords, adopting the findings of the Climate Change Commissions, and directing the Planning Department there to start using that information.
So what happens as a result of him signing that? What's changed?
Well, what's changed is, in Maui, if you want to try and get a permit to build along the ocean, now you have to consider, well, now it's statewide law, but before that, when Mayor Arakawa did this, the planning department now said, okay, what's the effect of climate change? What's the effect of sea level rise? How are you building are you really sure that you want to build a structure that has a lifetime of about 20 years? So all these questions come up.
Lifetime of 20 useful years because of inundation?
Yes. Yeah. So, it's putting the question, and then now the governor signed a bill that went through this year. It became effective immediately. So a few weeks ago, it became effective. That basically said everybody now must consider the effects of climate change in their planning and in their permitting. So that's a huge change for us in Hawaii.
And on the social part of the SDG goals, what changes as a result of that?
Yeah, so on the SDG goals, the 17 goals are encompassing, right? And for many of them, you see, the thing is, Hawaii is already actually doing all 17. We're doing them in different sections and in different ways. What I was trying to attempt to do is get us onto the same metric as the rest of the world, and look using all of the measurements that the UN have developed behind each of the 17. But in reality, Hawaii is way ahead in most of them. For example, one area in gender equality of all things. Hawaii is probably one of the most equal places on the planet based on the UN metrics, based on how they measure equality. Other areas, in number 14, life below the ocean. Hawaii, we're very much ahead. So I was trying to put it into the package that we can now measure ourselves against other countries in the world, including the United States, because the U.S., when they do their reporting, it's really the numbers from Hawaii that carries the day. So if we're able to separate ourselves and do a separate measurement using the exact same standards, and then just as an academic exercise, take out the rest of the U.S. and see where they stand. We'd see that Hawaii is really providing those numbers that's reported internationally.
Thank you for that. Elaine, let's get some questions.
Yeah, so Hawaii has arguably been incredibly progressive in terms of the 100% RPS and the 100% clean ground transportation, island commitments, and the carbon neutrality things. We've been talking about this throughout our plenaries. And now with additional sustainability policies, wondering how these efforts are integrated, or are they?
Very, very good question. Thank you for that. That's what the Sustainable Development Goals would have done, is would have provided the integration and the framework for all of these different moving parts to be measured against and to be evaluated. All of those things that you talked about are aspirational. And the hard part comes after we do the aspirational part. In other words, we have a goal out here in 2045. But in the end of the day, how do we actually achieve that? And that's the question we'll be facing in the next couple of sessions, and actually down the road, for meeting 100% renewable energy use in Hawaii. How do we do that? So we have a lot of organizations that have advocated for let's set the goal, but I'm really now much more interested in how do we achieve the goal. See, so that's what I'm getting at is I think Hawaii, in answering the question, yes, climate change is real. Now we're at the point of what are we going to do about it? We've set all these aspirational goals, all of these things we're leading towards. The hard part is how do we actually do it? And to get to that, we're going to have to make some lifestyle changes. We're going to have to think about how we use things. I was talking to the director of the Climate Change Commission, and she's from India, and she said her parents at some of the hottest places it gets to 120 degrees. I said, but her parents would turn on the air conditioner only for about 2 hours at the hottest time for one room, and then it's enough for them to continue for the rest of the day. Look at us, we are air conditioning such huge spaces at such huge expense that the carbon cost is very, very great. So these are the things we're going to have to start considering.
Well, it all starts with asking the big questions, and what's impressive about what you have done as a majority leader, but also as a state, is asking big questions, starting down that very difficult path to answer them, but seeing what's possible, what's needed, and going from there. And that puts you way out ahead of so many governments, but particularly leadership in the United States. So thank you for that, and please join me in thanking Senator Kalani English.